Hello and welcome to the Hidden Why podcast, episode 1011. This is my interview with Dr. Gleb Tsipursky, and we're discussing his books and his work about future-proofing. Hello, Dr. Gleb. Welcome to the Hidden Why podcast. Great to have you here today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
You're a bit of a prolific author, aren't you? You've written many books.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So the 7 books by now. And a couple of them have been global bestsellers, which I'm very pleased about. A couple of them have not done so well, but that's life, Can't always hit it out of the park.
You got several out of a whole bunch, then that's fairly good. You've got a nice book collection by the looks of it on the wall behind you. All sorts
that's
of
right, yes.
different books there as well. And you've got a new book out, which we're going to discuss today. But before we jump into that, mate, I always like to get a bit of a background into the person we're speaking with. So what is your background?
My background is, my expertise and background is in decision-making. So how do we make our decisions and how do we protect ourselves against an increasingly disrupted future? So future-proofing is the outcome of my expertise. Help people make good decisions, manage risks well, to protect themselves, future-proof themselves against this unknown future, the increasingly disrupted future. I've been doing this since 1999 now, so over 2 decades.
Wow.
And I've been fascinated by decision-making since that time. Since I was a kid, when I saw my parents making telling me to go with my gut, follow my intuition, the kind of thing you always hear about, how do you make decisions. And I saw that they were making some bad decisions in their life, in their marriage, by going with their gut, following their intuition. So that was a problem, and it helped me see that maybe that wasn't such wise advice on their part. And then I also saw what happened as leaders were praised for following their gut, trusting their intuition, and so on. When there was a dot-com boom, I came of age in a dot-com boom. So I was 18 in 1999 when the dot-com, web band, pet.com, boo.com were partying like it's 1999. For those who remember that Prince song. That was a while ago.
Yeah.
And then and they were praised in the Wall Street Journal and all these media. And just a couple of years later, they all went bust in 2001, 2002, and I was 21. And that helped me see that, these leaders, these top leaders, they were praised one day, they were criticized another, but they were making decisions in the same way. It's not like they were making them in any way different. But that helped me see that those people who we think of as, the top leaders also don't know what they're talking about in terms of making decisions when they talk about going with their gut. And so I decided to study this, and that was something that was always fascinating for me. And I started consulting, coaching, and training already from 1999, as I mentioned. I also went into academia, so I spent 15 years in academia. So over 20 years in consulting, coaching, and training, around 15 years in academia. I got my PhD at UNC Chapel Hill, and then I taught for 7 years as a professor at Ohio State University in the Decision Science Collaborative in the History Department. And so that's kind of my academic background. And all that time I was moonlighting as a consultant, coach, and trainer. And about a few years ago, I think about 3 years ago, I went full-time private, running a small consulting company called Disaster Avoidance Experts that focuses on this kind of stuff, on future-proofing through making the wisest decisions and managing risks well. So that's kind of my background and expertise. I've been writing books for a while. I have over 550 articles in venues like Fortune, Scientific American. I have a piece coming out on Fortune next week. I have Scientific American piece that came out like yesterday. Psychology Today, CNBC, Inc. magazine, Fast Company, all these sorts of places, USA Today. That's kind of a little bit about my background. My work has world renown. It's been translated into, translated, published in Chinese, Russian, Korean, Polish, German, other languages. So that's what I do. That's who I am.
That's you. Well, nicely explained too. A very interesting topic. Not too many people you meet that sort of are in this field that you're in of future-proofing. And I assume future-proofing doesn't just relate to businesses that you work with necessarily, but just life in general. I guess we all have to make good decisions to protect the uncertainty of our futures.
We do, and it definitely impacts people's personal lives. I focus on working with business executives because those are the folks who have the money to afford me. But my books are read and used by folks in all walks of life.
Yeah.
And talking about relationships, one of my books is really focusing on the relationships, professional and personal. It's called The Blind Spots Between Us, How to Overcome Unconscious Cognitive Bias and Build Better Relationships. That would be, talking about relationships and personal life, that would be a really interesting book for folks.
Yeah. They're all very, really fascinating topics, and fairly critically important, I would think, too. I don't know much about this future proofing and decision-making process. Where do you start when you're trying to explain what you do and how we can improve decisions?
Well, what we first want to do, so when we're thinking about improving decisions, is not trust our intuition, not trust our gut. Why is that?
Why is that?
Our gut, why is that, right? Our gut, we're advised to go with our gut, trust our heart. Tony Robbins tells us to be primal, be savage. Malcolm Gladwell tells you to make your decision in the blink of an eye in his book, Blink. That's trust your intuition, right? Unfortunately, when you look at the research on intuition, you look at the research on gut reactions, they are not adapted to the modern world. Our intuition is adapted to the savanna environment. And we used to live in small tribes of 50 people to 150 people. So the modern world has really been around since the 1990s with the rise of the internet. We haven't had time to evolve for it. It takes many thousands of years to really actually evolve for our emotions, our intuitions. What evolves much faster is our culture, and that's much more of the rational component, the head part, rather than the gut part of our thinking and decision-making. But people tend not to go with their heads, and especially in the more important decisions. They tend to trust our gut, and that's a big problem, because our gut, again, is adapted to that savanna environment. We rely on things like the fight or flight response. I mean, savanna environment, that was very important. To have a very strong fight or flight response. If you didn't have a strong fight or flight response, you need to jump at 100 shadows to get away from that one saber-toothed tiger. If you didn't get away from that saber-toothed tiger, well, you know what? You wouldn't be here today because your ancestors would be dead. We are all the descendants of those who have a very strong fight or flight response. Similarly, tribalism, right? Why is our world so screwed up and polarized in so many ways right now? And with all the discriminations, all these problems. Well, tribalism has a lot to do with it. In the savanna environment, it was very important for us to be tribal, meaning look for people who are like us, trust them, ally with them, who look like us, who share our values, predispositions, background, and be hostile to those who are not part of our tribe, the out group. Because if we weren't sufficiently loyal to our tribe, we'd be kicked out of our tribe and we'd die. And if we weren't sufficiently hostile to outsiders, they take over our tribe and we die. And again, you notice we're the descendants of those who didn't die. And as a result, we have all of these inbuilt intuitions, gut reactions, emotions, your heart, whatever you say, that lead us in the wrong direction. Again, tribalism is a clear example where we're very tribal as human beings, but in the modern world, multipolar, complex, global world, organizations, companies, and just ordinary life, that's a very bad idea. And we rely on the fight or flight response. We have way exaggerated responses in the modern world. We tend to jump to conclusions very quickly without nearly enough information. That was great in the savanna environment when we need to not think about getting away from the saber-toothed tiger, but jump. That was great. In the modern world, that's a terrible thing, and still, leaders and ordinary people are praised for making judgments quickly, going with their gut, and trusting their heart and all that. So
is it always wrong to trust our gut? Because sometimes I feel in my occupation and in other parts of my life, actually I probably often do go with my gut, but sometimes I feel I go with my gut and it makes right sense, and it seems to turn out that way. Is there times when our intuition is good to guide us?
Well, so what happens with your gut is that sometimes your gut is going to be right, and sometimes it's going to be wrong. Yeah. But you should never simply trust it. That's the thing. So that's the problem when we trust our intuition. Now, there are some situations where research shows, and by the way, this is all based on research in behavioral science, behavioral economics, cognitive neuroscience, psychology, all that stuff. We can talk about the research. But when you look at the research on where you can not worry about it and not check with your head, just go with your gut, there's only very small domains, specific domains. You might have heard about getting 10,000 hours of practice in a certain area to be considered master, right? You don't actually need 10,000 hours of practice in these areas. But what you need is a great deal of practice. So maybe 1,000 hours or something like that, just ballparking here, depends on the area, right? Different areas for different things, where you get a lot of feedback very quickly on whether you're right or wrong. So, for example, you probably have a lot of experience seeing your email and being able to tell, is this a spam email or is this an important email? Right? You can tell that at the blink of an eye, right? Very quickly. It's pretty obvious from spam emails, from your experience, seeing, oh, is this a spam email? I clicked on it. I shouldn't have clicked on it. I should have just deleted it immediately.
Yeah.
And so right now you have a lot of experience and you're pretty good at that. And that is the reality for most folks in the developed world who have email, right?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
that's an example of an area. Let's go to a different area in business settings. If you have P&L responsibility, and if you've been in P&L, profit and loss responsibility for a while, you can take a look at the P&L spreadsheet and say, okay, this is how the department is doing, this is how the division is doing, because you've looked at a lot of it, and you can tell very quickly what's going on there.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of things where you can trust your intuition and not check it. But that's not the kind of things that we usually have, and not the kind of decisions we usually face. We face decision about, well, am I going to work with this person or not? What kind of a message communication should I be sending? Who should I hire? What kind of strategy should I be pursuing? What kind of vendors should I be working with? Those are the much more, what kind of systems and processes should I implement? Those are the kinds of things that people tend to trust their intuition about, but they really, really should not. They should very much check with their head and not go with their gut.
Gotcha. So what's the difference between this unconscious, learning that guides us in our decision making? Because I guess a lot of that is through practice and experience, where we have this unconsciousness that actually helps us do it so we don't have to use that energy to make those decisions going forward. What's the difference between that and intuition, or is there a difference? Or is that exactly what intuition is?
It's not really a difference because people use those terms very vaguely and problematically. So I wrote a book called Never Go With Your Gut, How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters, which talks about this very topic. Your intuition, when people say intuition, they usually talk about the same thing as gut reactions, as emotions, as your heart. They don't differentiate. And here's the thing. The really difficult thing about not trusting your gut is that it feels right. It feels comfortable by definition. Not going with your gut is counterintuitive. It goes against your intuition. So all of that feelings that you feel inside, wherever you identify those feelings inside you that are pushing you to do something and are telling you this is the right thing to do, well, you know what? You can't say whether you're looking at someone and, let's say they happen to be of a different skin color than you. You can't say whether you are going to be more willing or less willing to hire them because they're of a different skin color than you, because of their actual qualifications or because of that tribal sensibility. We have a lot of research showing that people unconsciously discriminate against others without realizing it because of tribalism. We have a lot of information that people don't take nearly enough time and don't look at nearly enough data before making judgments, before coming to conclusions. And that's very regrettable. My new book that you and I talked about, Returning to Office and Leading Hybrid and Remote Teams, a manual and benchmarking to best practices for competitive advantage, I talk about a lot of bad decisions that people make, that leaders make, that cause them to go in the wrong direction because of these dangerous judgment errors. So specific ways that our mind is miswired. Due to the savanna environment, evolutionary background, just due to the wiring and structure of our brains, which we can go into, that's kind of the cognitive neuroscience part, they are called cognitive biases. So cognitive biases are these specific dangerous judgment errors that cause us, that they are the patterns, they are the ways that we are miswired, but cause us that are associated with us making these bad decisions. So specific ways that the researchers have shown that we make bad decisions, that's the patterns. Those are the cognitive biases. And there are over 100 of them. If you're curious, you can take a look at the list of cognitive biases on Wikipedia and look at all the research that provides the basis for them. You'll see that there's over 100 of these cognitive biases. Yeah, well. And I talk in my work about the most important ones for various areas of your life, whether your relationships, whether your fundamental decision-making, like Never Go With Your Gut, the book on relationships is the blind spot between us, or this new book on returning to the office and leading hybrid and remote teams.
Yeah. So what are a couple of those, the key ones that you talk about, the cognitive biases?
So let's talk about the specific ones from my latest book on returning to the office and leading hybrid and remote teams.
Yeah.
So there are really going to be 6 fundamental cognitive biases that are really problematic for leaders. One of these, one of the biggest ones for leaders making bad decisions, is called the status quo bias.
Okay.
The status quo bias. We like to stay with what we perceive as the status quo or get back to it if it's been shifted. And it's kind of understandable in the Savannah environment. So going back to the Savannah environment, why that would be, again, as I mentioned, a lot of these cognitive biases come from that Savannah environment. In the Savannah environment, when you go away from the status quo, that's a problem, because the situation in the Savannah environment is that if you go away from what's there, the traditions, the stability, you're likely not going to survive. It was a very precarious environment. And so that drives us to not like uncertainty, not like change, and to go back to the status quo. So we see leaders who are successful for 20, 30, 40 years in their career through in-office activities, driving their teams back to the office and making some pretty bad decisions while they're doing it. So for example, Google, and we're talking about like trillion-dollar companies, right? Google was saying for many, many months throughout the pandemic that once vaccination is widely available, everyone will go back to the office. I was saying this for many, 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 many months, and once vaccination started becoming widely available in late spring of this year, the workers at Google, from my internal sources, started to be frustrated that they were being driven back to the office. As the Google leadership was saying, oh, now we need to go back to the office. Because they discovered that, during this time, they can clearly do their work remotely fine, and they don't need to be in the office. So a lot of people were pissed at Google, and some started leaving, and other morale took a big hit, productivity, engagement. So eventually, Google recognized that they screwed up, and they said on May 5th that, we screwed up. We're now not going to force everyone to go back to the office. Up to 20% of our workforce will be allowed to work fully remotely, and another 20% can work from any office where they want, because plenty of people moved away from the offices where they previously worked. And that cost Google billions and billions of dollars in lost workers. Of course, these are high-paid, high-tech workers who will be very expensive to replace, and in productivity, engagement, morale, with distrust for the leadership, and in just changing plans. I mean, they had to do a lot of plan changing, and that cost them a lot of money because it's such a big company. So that's one example. And you know what? Same thing happened at Amazon. Amazon changed its mind and said we screwed up on June 10th. Same way, for same reason. And the same thing with Uber on June 24th. Apple is undergoing worker rebellion right now, where a lot of workers don't want to be back in the office. And Apple CEO Tim Cook is saying, we need to everyone go back to the office. And this happens at all companies. These are just the huge trillion-dollar companies, right? Doesn't get much bigger than Apple and Google.
What happened with Uber?
Huh?
What happened with Uber? You're still talking about Uber.
Uber, same thing.
Office workers and that.
We screwed up. We are going to now allow people much more flexibility. So this shows that these leaders were making clearly bad decisions if they had to go back and screw up. And because of the status quo bias is a huge one that's leading to it. Now, so that was one. And the related cognitive, not related, but another cognitive bias that's really important here is called the false consensus effect. The false consensus effect. Now, the false consensus effect causes us to believe that those who are in our tribal groups, who we perceive those to be on our tribe, would share our beliefs to a much greater extent than they actually do. Now, in the Savannah environment, it was actually generally the case that those in our tribe mostly shared our values. In the modern environment, much less the case, because people who are in our tribe, in our work tribe, are much less likely to share our other values and predispositions. So this leadership at Google, at Amazon, at Uber, at Apple, felt that their workers would generally agree with them and go back to the office, even if they would be complaining about it. Obviously, they didn't realize that the strength of the feelings of these workers and that the negative sentiment of the workers led these companies to reverse their decisions, which for each company cost many billions of dollars in lost workers, in lost engagement, and having to change plans.
Yeah.
Apple still didn't change its plans, but I suspect it eventually will. We'll see. But it's definitely losing a lot of workers right now. And we know that from the internal rebellion of Apple workers, which has become public, which is very rare for Apple workers to actually speak out. They're pretty loyal.
Right.
So that's the false consensus effect. Now, here's another one that's really important. It's called the confirmation bias. If you've heard about any cognitive biases, you've probably heard about this one. So we tend to look for information that confirms our beliefs, and we ignore information that does not confirm our beliefs. Yeah. And that's a big problem. So when you look at how leaders are looking for information about returning to the office, and I say this, I mean, like I mentioned, I've already helped 17 organizations transition back to the office. Many leaders don't actually survey their teams. What they do is the CEO talks to the C-suite, the C-suite talks to the senior VPs, and that's all. They all agree that, yes, we want to go back to the office. That's going to be the right thing to do, and that's what happens. They go back to the office. Well, they are all coming from the same position, from the same background of being leaders and successful for 20, 30, 40 years in their careers through in-office experiences. So this is a problem, the confirmation bias. And I'll tell you about another last one, and the other two I'll leave for the book for the folks who want to read it. The other one that I wanted to talk about is called functional fixedness. Functional fixedness. Now, what's that about? You might have heard the hammer-nail syndrome, where when we have a hammer, everything looks fixed like a nail. Well, functional fixedness refers to that tendency. So when we have one way of collaborating, when we learn one way of doing something, solving problems, collaborating together, tool sets, mental tool sets, we apply those to everything else that we do. And so that is a huge problem when people are trying to work in a remote setting or in a hybrid setting. So what happened in March 2020, the lockdowns, right? Everything was shut down, people shut down, and they didn't have a good way of collaborating virtually. So they imposed their in-office ways of collaborating on virtual formats. Things like using Zoom happy hours, which are not a good thing. We have research showing that they actually cause disengagement rather than engagement and morale and team collaboration. Zoom happy hours are not helpful.
What is Zoom happy hour? I've never heard of it.
Oh, okay. You're lucky. So Zoom happy hour is when everyone is supposed to go on Zoom and have social time and just socialize with each other. When all the members of a team or department or division, that's what a Zoom happy hour is. And so that does not work well because it works fine for when you have an actual happy hour in person and when you can communicate, chat with other people, but it does not work well when you're small squares on a screen. So that's something that is not a good idea.
What have they found with Zoom happy hours? Like, what are the consequences there or the side effects, I guess? Obviously, it's not popular.
Disengagement. So people are less engaged. So the goal of having team members take their time, I mean, they're taking time away from the work task to go do Zoom happy hour, is better culture, better morale, better engagement, better team building. What you actually look at the research, you see that it causes the opposite. It's taking people's time, but it causes disengagement, less teamwork, less collaboration. People feel forced, they feel alienated. It's not a good thing. And it's just one example out of very many where imposing in-office culture on hybrid and remote settings causes a lot of problems. So throughout this period, throughout the over 18 months of the pandemic, leaders have unfortunately used the same tools, managers, leaders, team leads, whatever, use the same tools to try to collaborate in virtual settings and hybrid settings as they have for full-time in-person activities, which does not work well. You need to strategically adapt them. And my book talks about the specific techniques that you need to strategically adapt your collaboration, your innovation, your productivity, your performance evaluation, your culture, your diversity, equity, inclusion, and your training, your professional development to virtual settings and hybrid settings. So how do you lead hybrid teams? How do you lead virtual teams? Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot to relearn here for business in general. Do you see this lasting a long time, this new hybrid remote work environment? Like, do you think we're going to stay this way and we're actually going to be even more reduced? Because at the moment I still see people going back to offices, particularly in the public sector here in Australia, a lot of people going back to the offices. A lot of businesses too that don't require, like retail obviously, need someone there in person. But even that business model is going online now, where you can purchase things online. So do you see it transforming majorly from here or reverting back?
So we're talking about the 50% of the people who can do their work remotely. So that's about the average ratios in modern developed economies.
About 50%.
In Australia, whether in the US, whether in Germany, Europe, whatever. Yeah. And so, yes, what we're seeing is definitely a shift to a hybrid model where people realize that, they don't need to be in the office to do their tasks. And in fact, when you look at the research, people are highly, highly more productive at home on their individual tasks. On average, people are, depending on the kind of tasks they do, but on average, they're 10 to 14% more productive when they work at home. 10 to 14% higher productivity per person. And it goes for even higher on your individual tasks, which makes sense because, on your individual tasks, you're not disrupted, you're not disturbed, you can just focus. It's much better for people. And people work longer because they don't have to do the commute. The commute is unpaid labor. In big cities, it can be as much as an hour or even more to get to your office from your home then go back.
I still wonder about that. I am I guess, highly disciplined sort of person with my time and got a high level of motivation. So working from home, I always have done it and I've done it fairly well. But I just feel that a lot of people maybe can't have that because they lack that motivation. And I still, I'd be interested to see where they get the statistics from saying that more people that work from home are more highly productive and work longer, because I sort of assume that people probably wouldn't work harder when they're not being watched.
Right, so that is a simple gut reaction mistake that you're making. Sorry.
That's all right.
That's not the case at all. When you're looking at data from, my book talks about that. It talks about peer-reviewed data, it talks about surveys. So surveys of people, it talks about organizations like Microsoft using Microsoft Team internal data on the productivity and performance of people. Slack, same things. Using internal data on productivity and performance of people shows very clearly that people are working longer when they're working from home. On average, during the lockdowns, on average, virtual workers worked 20 hours longer compared to their previous time work. And so, because they didn't have to do this unpaid labor of the commute. And so they worked quite a bit longer and they were more productive. So
is this a sample of workers across a broad spectrum of occupations?
Yes. Yeah, it's everyone who worked on Microsoft Teams, everyone who worked on Slack. So yes, across all sorts of companies, across all sorts of businesses, large, small, everything. So yes, people are highly more productive. Now, that certainly does not apply to everyone. Not that everyone is more productive. When you look at surveys of people's desire to go back to the office, on average, around 20%, 15 to 20%, depending on the survey, want to go back to the office full time. And they are more productive there, they like their environment. Other people, around 25 to 35% want full-time remote work. So they want to work remotely full-time. And the rest want a hybrid schedule of maybe something like 1 to 2 days a week in the office. So that's the majority of the people. So when you look at that, something like 55, 60% want a hybrid schedule. So given that, and given the difficulties with getting workers and getting good workers, it's very clear that the future is hybrid, and that's what people are moving toward and companies are moving toward.
What's the reluctancy to do this for employers? Is it just because they feel that their staff won't be as productive, or that
No, it's not. It's the status quo bias, it's the confirmation bias, it's the false consensus effect, it's functional fixedness. So the status quo bias, they feel their gut tells them it's the right thing to do. And it's pretty dumb. I mean, when you look at Google and when you see all their work can be done remotely, right? Pretty much all their work can be done remotely. And it's very clear that people want to work remote, and they know they have internal data showing that people are more productive working remotely. But they want their staff back in the office because the leadership feels that's the right way to work. Yeah. it's really not very smart, and it's just the same sort of thing that leaders tend to do. They make bad decisions because they feel that a certain way of collaborating is right. They don't even investigate better ways. That's kind of one dynamic. Status quo bias, confirmation bias, false consensus effect, that's one dynamic. Functional fixedness is a distinct and very important dynamic because they don't investigate better ways of working. They don't investigate better ways of innovating. I mean, lots of leaders say, well, I want more innovation for my team. That's BS. When you look at actual best practices for innovation in virtual teams and hybrid teams, you can have more innovation than in-person teams when you use the right approaches, when you don't use things like Zoom happy hours. There are definitely ways of getting that, but you need to not have that functional fixedness and try to innovate or collaborate in the same ways that you did when you're in office environment.
So how do leaders embrace people from working from home to give them, that leadership, make sure, people are being productive, motivate them without being distrusting or watching them, because I know there's different programs and stuff you can watch your people, but I assume that going remotely, it's a lot more obvious when you're being watched than being at work, for example.
Yeah, when you look at the research on those sort of programs and monitoring, you substantially decrease people's productivity when you monitor them. And you also decrease your attention because people are not likely to work for you when they can go to work for another company that doesn't do that sort of dumb thing. So no, it's a bad idea to watch people. Instead, and I talk about this in the book, what you need to do is transform your performance evaluation. Because right now, like you talked about watching people, the vast majority of performance evaluations, you have one big performance evaluation done annually, and it's based, generally speaking, on how much, on the amount of time that the worker has spent working. So how much have you worked? Yeah. So that's kind of the typical basis for performance evaluation. That's one big evaluation. That is not going to cut it for the hybrid and remote setting. So what you need to do is change your performance evaluation from amount of time spent work to deliverables, accomplishments. What did the person get done? What do they need to get done? What are their goals? And how do they perform against those goals? When you have that, now that's kind of one dynamic. Then you also need to not evaluate that once a year because obviously you have many smaller goals and you want to evaluate those. What you need to do is transform to once a week evaluations or once every 2 weeks if you have a large team. But generally once a week for 6 to 8 people teams is the right pattern. So once a week, small evaluations, brief ones, when you have a 15 to 30 minutes when, let's say, your supervisor. So what you do is you have your supervisee send you a brief report on their page listing what were their top 3 to 5 accomplishments for the week compared to the accomplishments they set. So they set some accomplishments last week. How did they do on these accomplishments? What kind of problems they faced? How did they solve these problems? What kind of self-evaluation would they give themselves? And finally, what are their plans for the top 3 to 5 accomplishments going forward for next week? And then the supervisor responds to that in writing briefly before a meeting, and then they hold a 15 to 30 minute meeting where they discuss these accomplishments, maybe coach the supervisee on solving the problems better. They agree or revise in the performance evaluation, and then they agree or revise on the plans for the goals to accomplish next week. That requires absolutely no watching of the employee. That gives the person full autonomy. And you know what? If they get their goals met in a shorter period of time than the standard 40 hours, great, wonderful. Please go ahead. Because what you should be measured on is your deliverables for the company, your accomplishments, not the amount of time spent work. Who cares how much time you spent work? If you work smarter and not harder, great. Do those accomplishments, get your things done, great. And if, sometimes you have more problems and you need to work longer to solve them, that's also the case. So that is what people should be measured on. And that meeting, that report and that meeting, those small weekly goals all get fed into a continuous promotion and evaluation system. So you don't have that one huge annual review where people don't know what they're being reviewed for, they don't know the expectations, and they get blindsided and surprised. That's no good.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think that's a great way to manage a business is on performance. rather than just on the time they put in. And I actually had someone mention to me the other day they work really hard and they just wished that rather than working until the end of the day, if they got everything done, which they normally do, in a shorter time, that they could go home and spend some time with family or whatever, which I agree. But there's got to be, some roles, I suppose, or some careers that have more definable goals and measures than other professions. Would you think? Or can we put?
I don't think that you have. When you have any career, any profession, you have certain goals that you want to meet. There's certainly some more. Well, some careers might have more. Let's say you're a salesperson. There are a number of sales calls you make, and there are a number of your rate of closing deals and your rate of generating leads, right? So that's doable. When you are, when you are a podcast host, right? You have a number of podcasts that you do, and you have certain advertising revenue that you want to meet, or whatever.
What about a receptionist? A receptionist, for example.
Well, a receptionist has to be in person, so that's not a job you can do virtually, right? So with someone who is an executive assistant rather than a receptionist, let's talk about that. Someone who is an executive assistant can absolutely do their whole job virtually, and then their measures can be how satisfied is your executive with your performance, and the various stakeholders with your performance. There are clear goals, and you can have that sort of activity where how satisfied is the executive on a scale. That's fine, and so you want to measure those. You can also have goals like have you met all the deadlines for the week? That can be another sort of goal. There are plenty of goals, and every job that you can imagine has certain goals that can be quantified and measured.
Yeah. I guess it's just looking at it differently, taking a different perspective on it, and brainstorming those goals. I really like it, mate. You've got so the book is out and available on Amazon.com.
Yep, it's available on Amazon. Yep, go check it out. Returning to Office and Leading Hybrid and Remote Teams. A manual on benchmarking the best practices for competitive advantage.
It's a long title. You get that out well.
Well, thank you. But the brief one is Returning to Office and Leading Hybrid and Remote Teams.
I'll stick the links in the show notes, guys, so you can pick up a copy of the book. How can people best reach you, Gleb?
They can check out my website for my company called disasteravoidanceexperts.com.
Yep.
Again, disasteravoidanceexperts.com. There's blogs, videos, podcasts, online courses, books, of course, coaching, training, consulting. Check out especially disasteravoidanceexperts.com/subscribe. There's going to be an assessment on these dangerous judgment errors in the workplace, these cognitive biases, and also a free course on making the wisest decisions, the Wise Decision Maker course. So again, check that out at disasteravoidanceexperts.com/subscribe.
Like it, mate. Really insightful. Thank you. I'll stick the links in the show notes, guys. Everyone listening out there, make sure you reach out to Dr. Gleb. Dr. Gleb, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Check it out, guys. thehiddenwhy.com, episode 1011. We'll see you next time. Peace, passion, and purpose. Bye for now. Thanks, guys, for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed what you heard. I hope you love what you're hearing. If you like this episode, guys, or any of the episodes that you're listening to here at The Hidden Why, please do me a favor by sharing it. You can share it with your families. You can share it with your loved ones. You can do that by using your favorite social media channels, using the icons on the platform that you're listening to The Hidden Why podcast. Also, guys, if you're a fan of the show, please connect with me. Connect with me at thehiddenwhy.com. I love to hear from you. I love to converse with the people that listen to this show to find out what they enjoy, what they don't enjoy, and perhaps if they have any questions or feedback for the show as well. You can stay up to date with all that I'm releasing here, guys. I do a solo show every Monday, a 3-minute thought every Thursday. I do 2 interviews a week on Wednesday and a Saturday, and a book review every Friday. You can stay up to date with all that by subscribing to my newsletter at thehiddenwhy.com. Just enter your email address there, and also subscribing to the podcast on the platform that you choose to listen to your podcasts. You can also support the show, guys, by using the Amazon links at thehiddenwhy.com. So if you like books, you can get all the books that I review there, and anything else really that you like to purchase through Amazon. So use that link, it helps support the show. And we've also got a deal with Audible, guys. Audible is a fantastic way to listen to all your favorite books. We've got a deal with them so you can get 2 free books when you subscribe subscribe to a 30-day free trial. So check that out again at thehiddenwhy.com. Guys, that's it from me. You know what to do. Go out there, breathe more passion into every single moment. Do do everything with greater purpose. And in doing so, you will discover your hidden why. This is The Hidden Why. My name is Lee Martinuzzi. Until next time, peace, passion, and purpose. See you soon.